A wave of alarm swept across the Middle East when Iran suddenly announced that it had launched a missile strike against one of the most powerful symbols of American military presence in the region, the massive Udeid Air Base, Qatar. Within minutes, the announcement raced across global media networks. News alerts flashed across screens, analysts scrambled for information, and governments began urgently assessing the implications. Across military and intelligence circles, one unsettling question quickly emerged. Had Iran just struck the heart of America's war machine in the Middle East? Al Udeid is not simply another base hidden in the desert. It is the central nerve center of U.S. air power across the region, a vast installation where surveillance aircraft, fighter jets, refueling tankers, and command operations are coordinated around the clock. From this single location, American forces oversee military missions stretching across multiple countries and conflict zones. If Iranian missiles had truly reached their targets there, the implications would be enormous. Iranian state media wasted no time declaring victory. Officials claimed that precision missiles had been launched in a coordinated strike and that several of them had successfully penetrated the defensive shield protecting the base. According to these reports, critical sections of the installation had been hit, but almost immediately, Washington pushed back with a very different version of events. U.S. defense officials confirmed that missiles had been launched, yet insisted that defensive systems intercepted the majority of them and that the base remained fully operational. So which version of events was closer to the truth? To answer that, we first need to understand why Al Udeid is one of the most important military bases on the planet. Located southwest of Doha in Qatar, Al Udeid is not simply another American military outpost. It is widely considered the single most important hub of U.S. air operations anywhere in the Middle East. For more than 2 decades, this sprawling desert installation has functioned as the operational brain of American military power across the region. Thousands of U.S. personnel operate from this base every day. Inside its heavily secured perimeter are advanced command centers where military planners monitor conflicts unfolding across multiple countries at once. From these facilities, American commanders coordinate surveillance missions, intelligence gathering, and complex air operations that stretch from the Persian Gulf to the Eastern Mediterranean. The base also hosts a massive fleet of aircraft essential to modern warfare. Surveillance planes track activity across vast areas of the Middle East. Fighter jets stand ready for rapid deployment. Refueling tankers extend the reach of American air power thousands of miles beyond the base itself. In many ways, Al Udeid functions like a giant control tower overseeing the United States' entire aerial presence in the region. Because of this enormous strategic importance, military planners have long viewed the base as both a cornerstone of American strength and a potential target in any confrontation involving Iran. Then came the moment that transformed years of warnings into a sudden and dangerous reality. According to Iranian officials, the strike on Al Udeid was not a spontaneous act. It was described as a carefully coordinated missile operation, carried out as part of a broader retaliation campaign amid the rapidly escalating confrontation involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. Late that night, Iranian commanders claimed that precision missiles were launched toward the Gulf, their trajectories aimed directly at one of the most heavily protected military installations in the region. Within minutes, radar networks across the Gulf reportedly began detecting fast-moving objects cutting through the darkness. Signals appeared on monitoring screens as the incoming missiles approached Qatari airspace, triggering alarms throughout regional defense systems. Inside and around Al Udeid, defensive protocols would have been activated immediately. Interception systems designed for exactly this scenario began tracking the incoming threats, calculating trajectories, and preparing to neutralize them before they could reach the base. But according to the narrative emerging from Tehran, not every missile was stopped. Iranian state media quickly began reporting that several projectiles had successfully pushed through the defensive shield surrounding the installation. Commentators described the strike as a breakthrough moment proof they claimed, that Iranian missile technology could reach even the most heavily defended American positions in the Gulf. Images and reports circulating through Iranian outlets portrayed the operation as precise, deliberate, and strategically significant. Yet, as those dramatic claims spread across international media, a critical question began to dominate discussions among analysts and defense officials. Had Iranian missiles truly penetrated the defenses protecting the largest American base in the region, or was something very different unfolding behind the scenes? For several tense hours after Iran's announcement, uncertainty dominated the global conversation. Governments, journalists, and military analysts were all trying to determine what had actually happened at Udeid. Then Washington responded. American defense officials confirmed that missiles had indeed been launched toward the base, the threat was real, and the alarms that night were not false warnings. But according to the Pentagon's initial assessment, the outcome looked very different from the picture being painted by Iranian media. U.S. military sources stated that the defensive systems protecting the base had been activated immediately after the incoming missiles were detected. Interception systems were deployed, and several of the projectiles were successfully destroyed before they could reach their intended targets. According to American officials, while some debris and fragments may have fallen within the perimeter of the base, the overall damage was limited. Critical infrastructure remained intact, and the base itself continued operating without major disruption. In other words, Washington was sending a very clear message. The strike had been attempted, but it had not delivered the devastating blow that Iran was claiming. This stark contrast between the two narratives immediately ignited debate across the global security community. On one side, Iran was portraying the operation as proof that its missile forces could strike one of the most important American military installations in the Middle East. On the other side, the United States was insisting that its defenses had worked and that the backbone of its military presence in the region remained firmly in place. Beyond the immediate claims about damage and interceptions, many analysts believe the strike was never only about the physical impact on the base itself. It was about the message. For years, Iranian military leaders have repeatedly warned that American bases across the Gulf would not be safe in the event of a major confrontation. From Qatar to Bahrain, from Kuwait to the United Arab Emirates, the region is filled with installations that support U.S. military operations. Most of them sit well within the range of Iran's expanding missile arsenal. Tehran has invested heavily in missile technology precisely because it understands a critical limitation. It cannot match the United States in conventional air power. The U.S. Air Force operates hundreds of advanced aircraft across the region, supported by carrier groups, surveillance systems, and global logistics networks. Iran's strategy has therefore focused on a different kind of leverage. Instead of competing directly in the skies, Iran has built a vast missile program designed to threaten distant targets from its own territory. Precision missiles, mobile launch platforms, and long-range strike capabilities allow Iran to project power without needing a large, modern air force. In that context, the strike on Udeid carries powerful symbolic weight. If Iran can demonstrate that its missiles are capable of reaching one of the most heavily defended American bases in the Middle East, then the strategic equation across the entire region begins to change. And that may have been exactly the message Tehran wanted the world to hear. As the conflicting reports about the strike continued to circulate, the reaction across the Gulf region was immediate and unmistakable: concern. For the governments of the Gulf states, the implications of the attack went far beyond the question of how much damage had occurred at Udeid. The deeper issue was what the strike revealed about the vulnerability of the region itself. Across the Persian Gulf, American military bases are deeply embedded within the territory of allied nations. Qatar hosts Udeid. Bahrain hosts the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and other partners also provide critical facilities that support American operations throughout the Middle East. These bases form the backbone of the United States' military presence in the region. But they also create a strategic dilemma for the countries that host them. If tensions between Iran and the United States escalate further, these installations could quickly become targets in a widening confrontation. What was once seen as a security partnership can suddenly transform into a geopolitical liability. For Qatar in particular, the situation is especially delicate. The country maintains close security ties with Washington and plays a central role in supporting U.S. military operations. At the same time, it must carefully manage its diplomatic relationships across the region, including with Iran. The strike on Al Udeid, therefore, did more than trigger military alarms. It reminded every government in the Gulf that in a conflict between major powers, geography alone can place them directly on the front line. As military analysts began examining the details of the strike, one conclusion quickly emerged. Regardless of the actual level of damage, something significant had just changed. For years, tensions between Iran and the United States have simmered through indirect confrontations. Attacks were often carried out through proxy groups, covert operations, or limited strikes that avoided directly targeting major American installations. But the reported missile launch toward Al Udeid represents something different. This was not a remote outpost or a small forward position. Al Udeid is one of the most critical pieces of American military infrastructure in the entire Middle East. Targeting a base of this scale moves the confrontation into far more dangerous territory. Even if the damage was limited, the act itself carries enormous strategic weight. It signals that a line many assumed would not be crossed may no longer hold. For defense planners in Washington, the implications are serious. If major U.S. bases can become direct targets during moments of escalation, then the entire framework of military deterrence in the region must be reconsidered. At the same time, Iranian leaders may see the event as proof that they can challenge American positions more directly without immediately triggering a full-scale war. That delicate balance is what makes the situation so dangerous. Each side now has to decide how far it is willing to push the confrontation and how far the other side might be willing to go in response. As the dust began to settle around the events at Al Udeid, analysts and military planners quickly shifted their attention to a much larger question. What does this moment reveal about the future of conflict in the region? Even if the physical damage to the base was limited, the strategic signal sent by the strike is difficult to ignore. A confrontation that once unfolded through indirect pressure and regional proxies has now edged closer to direct attacks on major military infrastructure. For decades, American bases across the Gulf have served as pillars of stability and deterrence. Their presence was meant to signal that any attempt to destabilize the region would face overwhelming response. But the events surrounding Al Udeid highlight a new reality. Those same installations are also highly visible targets. Modern missile technology has dramatically changed the battlefield. Countries no longer need massive air forces to threaten distant military facilities. Precision missiles launched from hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away can now challenge even heavily fortified bases. For military strategists, the lesson is clear. Deterrence in the modern era cannot rely solely on the size of military power. It must also adapt to a world where smaller actors can project force across great distances using relatively inexpensive technology. For political leaders, the lesson may be even more important. Moments like the strike on Al Udeid show how quickly tensions can move from rhetoric to real confrontation. And once that threshold is crossed, the path back to stability becomes far more uncertain for everyone involved.